transgender debate with Kellie-Jay and Peter Tatchell. Hopefully we know which is which. I like his flag there. At least it's not the progress flag, I guess. And then you've got Kellie-Jay, adult human female, in case we didn't realize, I guess. So yeah, this will be interesting. Talk TV. Here we go.
Peter, I believe that Kellie-Jay insists that trans women are not female. Where do you stand on that?
Well, of course, as I said, there's a distinction between biological sex and gender identity. And in my view, both are valid.
So
it is valid to...
His thing is, like, rather than sex and gender, it's sex and gender identity. And it's all very well saying both are valid, but, you know, the validity doesn't say anything to why your gender should, you know, take precedence over your sex, you know? For example, when accessing certain women's spaces or when accessing women's sports, you know?
Peter, I believe that Kellie-Jay insists that trans women are not female. Where do you stand on that?
Well, of course, as I said, there's a distinction between biological sex and gender identity. And in my view, both are valid. It is valid to affirm your biological sex. It's also valid to affirm your gender identity.
Yeah. Okay.
It's valid to affirm...
Yeah, just keep saying valid. This is already not a great start.
Your biological sex, and it's valid to affirm your gender identity.
Kellie-Jay, your view on that?
Well,
meaningless statement, pretty much.
Peter uses this euphemistic phrase of live and let live. And I think that when we say that, when we're talking about women's rights, is women have to live and let others live by just pushing themselves aside to allow men completely to erode our spaces. When you talk about it's the same as black, or you compare it to black rights, it would be like we have to say that black people are white. And so the comparison is...
Yeah, I hate the comparisons from like between like trans issues and then like race issues or gay issues or something, because they're so they're just not analogous in so many ways. Like, I wasn't born trans, you know. It's something that I came to be over time, but it was a choice I made ultimately. Like, you don't choose to be gay or have a certain color skin. It's a very different thing, and I guess it's intersectionality's fault. I guess that's why we all think this way, but it seems like a way of making things more confusing. Kingbot, hey, the word valid in trans issues has become so grating to hear. I completely agree with you. I think we should use a different word. We should explain why something is valid instead of saying valid and acting like there's the argument. Peter Tatchell, how long before he makes false conflations and weird analogies? We're potentially pointing at one already if we're like comparing this trans issues to black issues. Can never work out if he's just really ideologically captured or a very clever grifter. I think he's definitely ideologically captured. I doubt that he's grifting. I think he's got a long history of like human rights campaigning or whatever we're calling it. I don't know. He's probably going to say some pretty crazy shit. I don't know. The thing is, I'm not a fan of like Kellie-Jay, but I feel like I'm more likely to say, I feel like I'm more likely to side with her than someone like Peter Tatchell. But it depends. It depends what they say. So
is rather obscene and moderately racist. When we're talking about female rights, and we have to then use these caveats of including people that aren't women in women's rights, i.e. men, we erode women's rights. We erode the way that women can speak about ourselves and our rights. And I think it's just deeply misogynist. There is no other way that you could ask a group of people to forego their own rights for others. Nobody would be expected to do it in any other sort of minority or majority group.
And do you feel...
Can I just...
Go ahead, Peter, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see the evidence that women's rights are being eroded. For example, I've got a friend who works in a women's centre who has accepted trans women in that centre by a vote.
We're getting anecdotal, that's good.
Of the staff and of the women users. In 6 years since... Can you let me finish? Can you let me finish?
Yeah, Kelly.
Yeah, he gets angry when you when you interrupt him. I watched him and Frida Wallace taking on who was it, Helen Joyce and someone else at that live forum event. Crazy shit, like Frida getting drunk and like talking about a cock and stuff like that. It was good shit.
I'll let you get a chance. Don't worry.
Okay, fine.
In 6 years, there has never been a problem. The presence of trans women in that women's centre has not taken away any rights from the women there. Those women, trans and not trans, recognise they both experience misogyny. They both have been often victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and therefore they understand that they have a common interest in working together to challenge those forms of oppression.
I'm going to come back to you in just a little while, Kellie-jay, but let me just ask Peter, where do you know, it is a fact, Peter, that women, a lot of women do feel threatened by the idea that a transitioning male who's identifying as a female are allowed into their changing rooms, are allowed into the traditional female areas. There's talk today that trans women will be allowed into women's hospital wards. It is a fact that a lot of women, I get in trouble for saying this, but it does help in terms of differentiation. A lot of cis women feel threatened by that and feel very uncomfortable about that. I'm talking also about, sharing women being allowed, trans women being allowed into cis women's toilets. I mean, what are we going to do about that? I mean, because that surely is...
I mean, saying allowed in is a bit of a misnomer when it's kind of just always happened because... toilets don't have things like security. If someone wants to use a different bathroom, they're going to. And if they look like a woman, even if they're not, the chances are they won't get noticed in there. They won't, no one will have an issue with it. So it's a bit of an odd one, like debatable as to whether toilets have ever really been like single sex. But I can see the cause for like arguing for that. It's just, it'd be extremely difficult to actually enforce like a single sex space in that way.
It's an infringement. If cis women feel threatened by that, that is just a fact. What can we do about that?
Well, of course, hundreds, if not thousands of trans women have been using women's toilets for decades without a problem. It's a completely concocted fear and scaremongering.
Without a problem is doubtful. There isn't really evidence that trans people accessing these bathrooms leads to bigger issues. I think a potential problem for Peter's side would be the fact that there's so much less of an emphasis on trans people passing anymore, meaning that you're just more likely to make people feel uncomfortable in the bathroom. So like, for me, I think if you look like a woman, you're probably not causing any problems as long as you literally just go in there for what you're doing and you don't like stare at people, you don't try and chat everyone up with your deep voice and shit like that. But like, if a woman sees a trans woman in the bathroom and they're making no effort and they just look like a man, that just looks like a man is in the women's bathroom. And if they're gonna step over that particular like sort of social rule or whatever, then what other things are they gonna step over and not care about? So I can see fully why that would make people uncomfortable.
A demonization of a particular community. Having said that, I agree that women's safety is absolutely paramount. We must not sacrifice women's safety. But on the other hand, where is the evidence? There have been a small number of examples of trans women who've done bad things. That is true, but they are a tiny, unrepresentative minority. We would, I hope, never
I don't know if we can just say that they're unrepresentative every time a trans person does something bad. I don't know. It feels like the trans community could stand to like sort of call out people a bit more often, because we seem to have these problems quite often. We've got Chris Tyson at the moment. There's been recently that Rose Montoya, who was accused of sexual assault by a lot of different people. We had Keffels like fucking scamming people. It seems to happen an awful lot. So I don't know if it's fair to just write off the bad ones as like, oh well, it's just a few bad ones. Like, I don't know. Is that good enough?
Demonize the Muslim community because of the terrorist acts of a handful of unrepresentative Muslims. We don't generalize.
Muslim is a religion, not a... Actually, maybe Muslim is closer than fucking, I don't know. Maybe that's a good comparison for once.
That way about Muslim people, or indeed about black people or gay people or anybody else. But some people do demonize trans people on the basis of what a handful have done that is bad. The way to deal with that is to, of course, to identify those bad people and to make sure they don't have access. So, for example, if someone has...
Yeah, how do you fucking... I don't know, like... do we have precogs? How are we determining who the bad people are before they've even done anything? Like, that's crazy. I mean... It's not like trans communities are going to do that. They're not going to out bad people in their midst because they just don't do that shit. So I don't know what he's getting at here.
A history. If a trans woman has a history of physical violence or sexual violence against women, of course they should not be admitted to women's spaces unless there's very clear and incontrovertible evidence that they have reformed and are no longer a danger. But if that threshold has not been met, of course they should not.
Like, how would you... This is another thing with the bathroom things. How would you enforce that, let alone enforcing a women's space so that trans women can't get in there? You know, when it's something like toilets with no security and shit like that. Like, how would you identify this? That's a great force frame, by the way. Yeah, I don't know. I think at the moment I'm feeling this. She's angry and he is, he's having fun. Look at that. He's having fun.
Not be in women's changing rooms. They should not be using female toilets. They should not be in female prisons.
Kellie-jay, I apologise for using the term cis women. I got in a lot of trouble on Twitter today. But in this kind of discussion, it is handy for the purpose of differentiation. So please forgive me for this. I'm not that keen on that phrase myself.
That is true. I'm trying not to say cis myself. And sometimes it kind of is a bit easier than constantly saying, like, I don't know, trans women and women or something. Non-trans women. I don't fucking know.
We managed for many centuries without it. But that given, what is your response to what Peter says about women's spaces and the fact that trans women present no threat?
Well, I think both of you men encapsulate a point quite beautifully, which is due to the erosion of language, due to allowing men being called something, a subset of women, we now can't even have clear conversations in what we're talking about. We are not saying that a specific group of men present a specific threat to women. We are saying that all men proportionately propose the same risk to women. So as soon as we obscure the language...
I need to find something, like, I need to see whether, like, crime by trans women is more proportionate to crime from men or women, you know? Because I'm not sure about that.
Language by calling some men this word trans woman, which I don't feel makes any sense at all. As soon as we use that word, we then can't talk about keeping women's spaces for women only.
I mean, you still can if you're using women and trans women as two completely different things, which is how I use them. Like a trans woman is a male necessarily. A woman is a female necessarily. Like, there you go.
Cis is a word that is totally unnecessary. If we just understood that women are women and nobody else is, then we don't need a prefix. And we could just stick to calling men men and they can stay in men's spaces. It's not just about the safety of women. It's about the dignity and privacy of women. And right from the time that girls hit puberty, women understand a very different pathway to men. I don't pretend to understand what it feels like to be a man. I've got 3 boys and a husband. I have no idea really how it feels to walk around in their skin. And I don't suppose they really know what it feels like to be me. And so when you're a girl, you go through puberty, you have an exchange with the world where you do become somewhat public property. Your body, your breasts, walking around the street, seeing overtly sexualized images of women everywhere. It gives you a different currency in the world. And I don't think it's fair to then say that we have to give up any of our spaces, how we feel, the male gaze, our dignity and privacy, to men who feel that they need to be validated living as a woman.
Peter,
I don't know if she really made an argument as to why any of that is. Like, why is the odd tranny going in the toilet, like, destroying your, like, dignity or whatever? I'm not really sure about that. I mean, you know, the male gaze, I mean, if they're not looking at anyone, then I don't know. But hey, you know, we're nitpicking a little bit for sure.
You heard what Kellie-Jay just said about trans women being allowed into traditional women's...
He talks too much, I think. I think it would be better if, like, one just responded to the other a bit more often.
Spaces, that it wasn't a good thing. Is what she says transphobic?
I try and avoid those terms. I understand that feminists, or some feminists, in fact, probably...
Like, why asking if it's transphobic? Who cares if it's transphobic? It's whether it's right or not. That's not really here nor there. I don't know. Even if what she said is transphobic, like, for me, I'd still want to engage with those terms rather than just, you know, take it back to, well, you're being bigoted, so...
A minority of feminists are very trans-critical, but most feminists, in my experience, and according to some of the polls, are not. They support trans rights, including the rights of trans women. But as I said, I don't go into using those terms. I have a disagreement, but it's a respectful disagreement. And I do listen and hear what people like Kelly are saying. But I'd just like to add that I'm old enough to have been involved in solidarity with the women's liberation movement way back in the early 1970s. I can remember when the women's liberation movement had their great protest against the Miss World contest outside the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah, I don't know how relevant this is going to be to today. We live in a very different world. And
in late 1971, the Gay Liberation Front, of which I was a part, brought along our contingent to stage an alternative Miss World on the pavement outside. And this featured our trans activists who were dressed as mistreated, misrepresented, misused, and so on, to emphasize the way in which women had traditionally been put down. Now, I can remember...
Wouldn't that feel a bit weird? Like, bringing a bunch of men along to be like, this is what women go through. Like, I don't know about that.
The women's liberation activists positively welcomed those trans women who did that alternative Miss World pageant. They positively welcomed them to the protest and thanked...
It's just more anecdotes, and now anecdotes from over 50 years ago. I don't know. This guy's meant to be like, I don't know, he's meant to have quite a lot of standing, but every time I watch him, it's just like, Jesus Christ, just let's get a point here, you know what I'm saying?
Them. And it was an absolutely fabulous spoof on the actual official contest. So back then, women's liberation had a very different set of ideas. I mean, back then, the women's liberation movement said that biology is not destiny. In other words, that a woman's biology should not predetermine her life chances and opportunities. But now some feminists seem to be saying that biology is destiny, that if you are born biologically a male, that's all that counts. That, you know, the fact...
I don't think these two ideas have to, like, be mutually exclusive, to be honest. Like, if you're saying biology isn't destiny, you don't literally mean, well, then you can change all of your biology to become a completely different thing, you know? Like, you're still gonna be you. It's more a case of, like, you can work these jobs, you can go out and do this instead of just having the kids. Like, I don't know.
The fact that you feel and act and, you know, live your life as a woman, as a trans woman, that is irrelevant. So really, those original ideas are being turned on their head. And I think it's very sad, but I'm still happy to continue the dialogue.
Well, we all are. Your response to that, Kellie-Jay?
Well, I'm very happy Peter's continuing the dialogue also, because I see that we probably couldn't find a member of the trans community to actually speak this evening. And so I'm really grateful.
Well, that's not a fair thing to say. We thought long and hard about how to do this. But please continue.
Okay, all right, I'll stand corrected. For a start, I'm not a feminist. I'm quite dismayed at the mainstream feminist movement, who has seems to have forgotten what actually being a woman is. I find some of the language really difficult, Peter, and perhaps you could explain a little bit more about what on earth, without using sort of stereotypes, which I'm sure you wouldn't, what on earth living as a woman might mean, how somebody born male actually is a woman, why my biology, which...
So like living as a woman, I'll answer that before he does. To me, I guess it's just taking on certain social and physical aspects of womanhood. I think that's about all there is to it, really. Obviously, you can't magically take on the role of like a childbirther or whatever. You know, you wouldn't be able to breastfeed a kid without medical intervention, and even then, should you, it's still a bit kind of up in the air on that one. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's not a great way of wording it, really, because in what way do I live as a woman, really? Well, I don't know. Kind of, I get referred to as a woman, I get referred to as a she, I get referred to as a female name. That's kind of about it. It's very superficial, ultimately. And you kind of, it's easier for me to just accept stuff like that, because I know I haven't magically changed like my sex overnight, you know. So I guess that's what it means to me. Let's see what Peter says, though. I think she's still got some more.
Dictates the fact that I have reproductive capacity, which is something that only women have. It's not all women have, but only women have. No man certainly does. The fact that women do most of the unpaid labor throughout the world, the fact that in poor countries, in poor households, in fact, in most households, when it comes to unpaid labor, everybody seems to recognize which sex is the most appropriate to carry out those duties. And so when we're talking about living as a woman, are we saying that there are men throughout the country who are doing the bulk of the unpaid labor, that are doing the more caring roles?
Yeah, there probably are. I mean, that's not men living as women, though. That's just, you know, that's just living in the modern age.
That are doing the lower paid jobs? Are we saying that out in the fields across the world, there are men with babies on their backs doing backbreaking work? There are little male babies in carrier bags on rubbish wastes in third world countries like Pakistan. I mean, is this something that's widely recognized, that we can just choose our sex? Or is this really just a virtue of very privileged men, very entitled men, who feel that they can just demand that women completely concede the rights that we fought very long and hard for?
Peter, your response?
Yeah, I'd sort of say I don't know what rights I'm demanding women like concede personally, but hey, I don't know. I don't go out much, so it's rare that I am in a position to cause any kind of problem, even if I wanted to. So,
well, the issues that Kelly has raised are absolutely paramount. You know, everything she's saying about the second-class status of women legally, socially, culturally across the world is absolutely true. And of course, we should fight that. But I don't think that precludes the fact that we should also respect and accord rights to trans women and men as well. You know, it's not either or. You know, all these battles.
Not pie. It's rights aren't pie. If you take some, there isn't less for everyone else. But I thought he was going to say that for a minute. I was about to end the stream right there and then, because I can't hear that fucking phrase again. Jesus Christ.
We can fight together. And you've got to remember that, of course, trans women do suffer like non-trans women, other women, you know, very high levels of domestic violence, sexual assault and rape, discrimination in the workplace. So they have some of the experiences of women precisely because they are trans women. And I just think we should, you know, not be seeking to highlight the divisions or the differences, but find the common ground where all women, including trans women, can work together to challenge the misogyny that Kelly rightly identifies.
Can I sort of ask both of you, but I think I'll stick with you first, Peter. Can we get to Laurel Hubbard and the issue of women's sports? As I say, I try and studiously sit on the fence on this issue.
I'm trying to think if you really like meaningfully answered the things she was saying. To be fair, she asked about 20 questions in a pretty short space of time. Yeah, hang on. I actually need to think about that now.
Carrier bags on rubbish wastes in
as may
seeking to highlight the divisions or the differences, but
sit on the fence on this issue as to Laurel Hubbard and the issue of women's sports. As I say, I try and studiously sit on the fence on this issue as an impressively unbiased presenter. But I do have a problem, I think, with trans women taking part in sports again.
Listen, even I have a problem with this. Like, I feel like a lot of this stuff, like, going back like 7 to 10 years, no one was pushing for like trans people in sports and like trans kids in that, and then suddenly it all started changing. So I don't know, this kind of shit has left me behind a little bit. Me personally, I'm not pro trans people in sports, like trans women in with women, because there's too much of a potential for an advantage. So
against women, particularly if they've been through puberty as males, they will surely have more strength. Laurel Hubbard, the New Zealand weightlifter, of course, is a very poor example because she turned out to be rubbish at weightlifting and came about 43rd. But that notwithstanding, where do you stand on trans women taking part in women's sports? Because many women's sports...
Let me guess, it's been happening for ages, no evidence of an advantage. Well, you know, what trans women have won gold at the Olympics, stuff like that. But let's see.
Players feel that in the end, that will mean the end of female sport as we know it.
Well, again, this is an entirely legitimate and understandable concern, and I'm very keen to support those who want fair play in sport. But, you know, you've got to look at it across the board rather than just the stereotypes and the exceptional individuals. Most trans women are not physiologically much different from other women. You know, they're not.
Is that true? I feel like my bone structure is pretty male, personally. It hasn't changed. I don't know. There's a lot of things. You know, you think about things like lung capacity, that's going to have a huge effect on certain sports. Yeah, like even the way your hips are, like, this is a weird thing to say. Like, there's a fair amount of differences. I think I probably have a little more in common with a man than a woman, like physically.
Huge, great, bulky, you know, individuals, you know, with huge bone and muscle.
Possible exception of Laurel Hubbard, sorry.
Well, yes, but as you said, yeah, that didn't help her one iota, you know. No. And a lot of these women, the trans women, their testosterone levels are comparable to those of other women.
The testosterone level isn't the only thing that's important. Like, there's quite a few measures of strength. Like, even things like muscle mass, like by itself, there's other things you need to consider as well. Like, I've seen plenty of studies suggesting that even after 2 years of HRT, like, trans women aren't really quite down to the level of the average woman in terms of strength yet. Like, there isn't that much research on it as it is. And what we do have is very inconclusive.
When I look at the English women's rugby team...
Oh my gosh, she's not happy.
I see some mighty fine specimens of womanhood there. Big, bulky, but not trans. I can also see and know some trans women rugby players.
Seems like something that would be pretty easy to study. Maybe, I don't know. For whatever reason, there's only so much research in those kind of areas. I think one problem is, to be honest with you, that there's just not many like sports people in trans circles. Like, very few of them do any kind of sports at all. In terms of like proportions, it's like way lower than like gay people and lower still than straight people, you know? And yeah, probably not much money in it. I don't know why none of these people that have like trans YouTube channels that actually do quite well and get like Patreons and stuff like that. I don't know why they don't ever think about like funding anything like this. Maybe you get the odd one that does. It kind of seems like a lot of them don't do a huge amount with their money in this kind of thing, but I could be wrong.
Players who, by comparison, are quite puny. So again, we've got to avoid generalization. And it's important to remember...
he just wants to... He wants to make the conversation as general as possible, but then say, well, we've got to avoid generalization, having just compared, like, female rugby players to male, I don't know, whatever the fuck it was. I'm not sure about this at all, Peter. I'm sorry.
That nearly all elite athletes have some kind of physical advantage. You know, those with fast twitch muscle fibers will be much faster and better at sprinting. But no one is saying they should be banned.
Well, no, because they're still female. Obviously. Fuck me. Like, I don't know. I've learned a little bit about like trans sports and stuff, and it's a bit eye-opening how terrible a lot of the pro-trans arguments actually are. It's because we don't really have anything. And if we were being honest, we'd probably accept that it's not great. You know, maybe we just shouldn't let trans women in with the women's in most sports. Like, if there's sports where there's really not a gender advantage or a sex advantage or anything, like maybe, yeah, but most of them aren't like that. And when people actually try and make arguments, it just never works. I'm starting to see why. A lot of people just literally skip straight to, well, trans women are women arguments. It's because, well, there aren't any others anyway. So you might as well just repeat the phrase ad nauseum until the other person gives up and walks away. So I don't know.
Likewise, those with extra large hearts or lungs will have an advantage, particularly in endurance and fast-paced sports. But
interestingly, one of the sexes has a bigger average lung capacity than the other. It's almost like he's suggesting that maybe there is an advantage possible, you know?
No one's saying they should be banned. And
we've already said it. I don't need to keep saying it. It's obvious what the problem with his argument is right now.
Athletes with very tall and extra long legs, they will have an advantage in basketball, but no one's saying that they should be banned. So it's a bit odd to me, the way in which trans athletes are being singled out.
Because they're literally male and it's female sports. Why is that odd? Jesus Christ. If you decide that every difference should be like sort of given the same standing, so trans woman difference number 1, they're males. Trans difference number 2, they tend to have bigger body bone structures. Like, if we decide to like just equivocate all of those things and be like, well, women can be taller too, it's just nonsense. Like, it's ridiculous. This isn't gonna fly. Like, she's not gonna be cool with this shit. Like, who's listening to this apart from people who are already part of the cult? You know what I mean? That are gonna agree with this shit. I don't know. Maybe he knows he barely has to try. Who knows? I don't know.
For particular penalization, when all elite athletes usually have some form of advantage.
Okay.
The difference being that those aren't advantages that came from literally being born male, which is literally the thing that we were trying to get out of women's sports, because males tend to do better at sports. Fuck me. He must know this, surely. Surely he knew when making this argument how utterly bunk it was, you know? I fuck me, like, considering his age as well, like, it's a bit terrifying.
Kelly?
Well, I just find it quite incredible that we're pretending now that the difference between men and women is somehow something that's just happened, that just occurred to us. And the reason that the Olympics has got male and female categories is just because they decided to one day.
I actually fucking hate the fact that I've been agreeing with kellie-jay Keen. I want to say that. I find her incredibly performative. Like, this fucking female pin, the fucking adult human female shit in the background. It's cringe as fuck, but Peter Tatchell is completely fucking wrong in this. in this. I'm so sorry. You don't think it helps the people he purports to be representing? It absolutely doesn't. He's filling their heads with shit and giving them arguments. Oh, well, Peter Tatchell said it, so it must be a good argument. It's not. There's such a consistent, disingenuous premise to everything he says, which is why I asked if he's just become a grifter now. I'm not sure. I mean, this was from a few years ago. This was 2021. Yeah, August 2021. It's almost 3 years ago. But it's possible. He seems to have settled on the just, well, you know, we need to not generalize and stuff, and not really answering anything of substance. And it seems like he's either had a lot of influence on other trans people, because I see these kind of argument tactics a lot, or he's been influenced by the trans cult and has adopted this kind of shit. Bigger quads, hey, like, nothing against trans. Just why do I see a trend that people adopt sexual orientation as a literal identity and then make it core of their personality? I'm not sure. Maybe these people are insecure about their personalities and are looking for something to override them. I'm not sure. I think the problem is people are never going to admit to like doing that, even when they do, which I agree some of them do. I'm not really sure how to answer that. I think it's probably what happens when you're like lonely and don't like yourself and find something to latch onto. You probably do jump in with both feet a bit. And, you know, quite a lot of these people are like autistic and have ADHD and stuff like that. So that probably doesn't help either.
And they're not really that important. All of this is just the same. It's just the same nonsensical, dishonest narrative, and it's just not true. And I almost don't.
Yeah, the problem is she's right. Like, it's so annoying. I don't want to like shit that she says because I don't like her at all. But she's correct. Like, he's just waffling a load of shit, being like, well, you know, longer-legged women have an advantage too. Yeah, well, they weren't born male. Like, obviously that's the issue there. Fuck me. Like, why would you waste your time? Like, fuck. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know what he's doing.
Believe anybody who says that they think that it's true that men aren't bigger, stronger on average, and certainly in elite sports. If you compare the top flight female rugby team against the men, they're infinitely smaller. It's just...
Wasn't there, I'm sure it was the US women's team, soccer team, we call it football. I'm sure they lost to like a bunch of high schoolers or something. There was like, I think there was a tennis game between, I don't know if it was Serena or someone like that, but against like some like teenage boy that lost or something. I can't remember. Hang on, I can have a quick look.
What is up, soccer fans, and welcome United States Women's National Team fans to Fact or Fiction Sports Talk here on the Sports Reaction. Today's Fact or Fiction statement is the United States Women's National Team lost to the U15 Dallas, that's under 15 boys, in a soccer match. And before you jump down in the comments and breathe down my throat saying, hey dude, they lost 5-2, I'm not questioning the score of the game. The statement is they lost in a soccer match. I'm going to talk about this, analyze it, whether I think it's fact or fiction. Of course, please.
Wait, how can they... Like, if they lost 5-2 in a football game, how can they not have lost in... I don't know, whatever. Anyway, that's the thing that happened.
Preposterous that we have to pretend that this isn't real. Can I just make one other point that I wanted to make earlier, and that is about all of this. We can talk about toilets, we can talk about third world countries, I can bring in all different examples of where women and men are different in sports and so on. But what this actual whole movement is creating, this so-called trans movement, is it's creating little girls across the United States of America with double mastectomies as young as age 12. So
it's important to remember the US, their attitude towards like young people transitioning is actually a lot more liberal than ours, from what I remember. So the Dutch protocol was a study back in, I think it was about 10 years ago, that suggested that young people transitioning was like beneficial and like using puberty blockers and stuff. And I think we tried to recreate that study, but didn't see the benefits, especially to mental health, anywhere near as much. I'm pretty sure the Americans did their own study and found very much the opposite. Like, found that, yeah, it's like really good. You have to get these kids full of puberty blockers and shit like that. So I think that goes some way to explaining why they have a pretty crazy like mentality towards this, whereas the UK is very much more cautious, a bit like somewhere like Sweden.
So we can have these frivolous debates. We can have all these debates about these other things that are really important. But I don't think I would be fulfilling my duty as a women's rights campaigner if I didn't talk about the fact that we are literally slicing off the breasts of girls, tens of dozens every day throughout the United States of America. And it will come here because that's what people are campaigning for.
Okay, Kelly, I'm running out of time. I'm going to have to give, thank you so much for that. I'll just give Peter one last moment. A final comment, Peter.
Well, the slicing off of breasts, I mean, I've never heard of that at the age of
no
12. And so
no, well, 12 maybe. Although actually, no, hang on. I've seen a study that covered a whole load of people, like women from the ages of like 12 to about 17, 18, all of whom had mastectomies. So either they made all their shit up. And I think the conclusion was towards trans positive. So it's weird if they did. Either they made all that shit up, and all those like children's centers in like Boston or wherever it was, I think it was Massachusetts, they like freely advertise like mastectomies for like 15-year-olds. But we always go back to this, well, I don't see any of it happening. Like, oh, it's not happening though, is it? And like, I'm pretty sure they don't do surgeries on minors. They fucking do, okay? They absolutely do. We're getting nothing from lying about this, so why lie about it? Unless you're trying to protect some kind of agenda or something, or protect something that you know is wrong, you know?
Certainly in this country, there are very strict rules and procedures that would not allow that to happen. Moreover, those who do identify as trans, whether they be male or female, have to go through a very rigorous, long, prolonged period of assessment, of counseling.
Is that true? Is that true in the US? I've heard like very conflicting things. Like in some places, it takes quite a long time to get any kind of treatment there. In other places, you can get all of it like that. So I don't know. I don't know if he has a single clue of what he's talking about right now. The whole I don't see any of it implies in an echo chamber. Yeah, I've heard that so many times. Like when I used to talk to like my trans friends who I barely have any now, but who gives a shit. Like when I used to talk to them about some of the insane shit that I witnessed in like trans communities, like that's what they'd always say. Like, oh, well, I don't really see any of it. Well, of course you don't. You fucking agree with most of these people. You're like a fucking far leftist weirdo yourself, so like why would you see it? It just infuriated me, so I don't know.
Counseling to make sure that their identity is what they say it is, that they're comfortable.
You can't, like, it's so difficult even to ascertain that their identity is what they say it is, because first off, someone's identity, you're only going to understand what they tell you about it, and what they tell you about it might not even be true. Like everyone fucking knows if you're getting assessed for something, like let's say you're getting assessed for depression and you want it to be known that you have depression and you want a diagnosis of depression and you're given a questionnaire, like you've got every incentive to exaggerate how you're feeling. Like, do we think that this doesn't happen in like gender clinics? Do we think that no one talks about how they've been having like these thoughts their whole life about how they should have been born male instead of female? Whether they do or not, you know? I don't know. Like, he must have thought about this kind of stuff. Like, he must just really, really have, like, drank down the Kool-Aid, drank down the Flavor Aid, you know?
With it, they're going to stick with it. And we know that those who get that counseling and support...
I don't think you ever know who's going to stick with it either. Like, fuck. I don't know. It might not happen. I'm still bracing. I'm still worrying about the sort of wave of detransition that might be on our doorstep at some point soon. But you know, so much of it remains to be seen. And while it remains to be seen, people are going to be saying, "Well, most trans people are happy that they transitioned." So, I don't know.
And who are able to transition, their mental health dramatically improves with much lower.
Where's the evidence for that? Is there actually that much evidence for that? There's some. Is there that much though?
Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. And I think that's what we've got to think about always. What is for the health and well-being of these trans kids and teenagers and adults? Let's make sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about the Dutch protocol. I didn't think this would be that relevant, but like their study suggested that if a kid supposedly is trans, then giving them puberty blockers is beneficial to their mental health. We did a study in this country, which I think the results didn't come out until quite recently, even though it was years ago. And it didn't find the same thing. It didn't find that it really had any effect on their mental health. So, I don't know.
Or that they don't suffer by being denied the treatment they need in order to affirm their gender identity. Let's allow them to make that choice.
Well, I mean, fuck. The other thing is, what even is a gender identity? Like, we talk about it being this huge unimpeachable thing, which apparently takes precedent over sex, but like, what even is it? What scientific basis is there for gender identity? You know, like, sex is fairly obvious because every one of these people exists because of sex. Same for me, you know. But I don't know. It's Peter Tatchell.
And no one is pressuring non-trans or other women to transition. No one is pressuring women in general to be trans. It's about individual personal choice.
No one's,
and I think
women in general to be trans, like, I don't know. The worst thing is, like, in like groups of teen girls, there probably is a decent amount of peer pressure to transition. So hey,
in a free society, we should accept that and live and let live.
Well, that was fascinating. I wonder why the trans rights side keeps losing on all these debates. I'm not sure.